Welcome back everyone to another technique coding programming tutorial. In this video we're finishing off our iOS authentication app. We're going to be making the actual network requests to register for a new user, log in, fetching an access token from the backend, and we're also going to be fetching the secure data using that access token. In the last video, let me go over to the project here. In the last video, what we did was we set up the model layer, basically the business layer of the app, into two sections, the system and the network. We created a access token object. This is what's going to be received from the backend when we log in. It has a access token and a refresh token, although we won't be using the refresh token. This is used to fetch a new access token when the current access token expires. This is how you get a perpetual login that's a little bit more secure than just storing credentials on the app, which you should never do. We created the file, or the class, struct, that deals with Keychain. So let me minimize some of this stuff so you can actually see. It's just real simple CRUD methods, save, get, delete. And those just create queries from that Keychain uses to fetch, in this case, save, fetch, and delete passwords. We're basically using the generic password secure class that Keychain has built in, and we're saving these access tokens in Keychain. Keychain handles all the encryption, so we don't actually have to worry about storing it. And we also created a network handler to handle all of our network requests. Now, what we did in that previous video was we made these a little bit more generic so they can be used for multiple different types of requests. What you don't want to be doing in projects is you don't want to be creating boilerplate for every single network request. I've seen people do that, and it's not very scalable. It creates a lot of clutter in the app, and if you want to refactor things, then you have to refactor it in multiple different locations. And then we created a secure fetch data. This is the payload that we get when we use the access token to fetch a message from the backend server. I go in depth on the Codable protocol and how it's being used in this context, so go back and watch that video if you need to, and look into the Codable protocol on your own time to get a better understanding of it. I might go in depth on that protocol in a future video. In this video, though, we're using all of this and we're hooking everything up. So what we will be doing is we will be creating ViewModels to store the business logic and to make the network requests, and to also clean up the view controllers just a little bit. We don't have a lot of code in here, but it's nice to separate the view logic from the business logic, which is the role of these ViewModels. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So the first thing we actually have to do is we have to create a new object to store the URLs and the routes that we'll be using to communicate with the backend server. Right now, the app doesn't actually know where the server lives. So what we need to do is we need to create a new file, and we're going to call this one NetworkRoutes. And I like organizing. Some people have different ways of organizing where they put the URLs to contact a service. It really depends on what your use case is. I've actually adopted this pattern from another developer that did it this way, and it just works very well. And the way that this is set up is NetworkRoutes. You set up an enum, and you store all of the static or the variables or the constants of the URLs right in this enum. Now, why am I using an enum? This is kind of a slightly debated topic, but I'm not using a struct here, and there's a very, very important reason why this is. Whenever I store constants, I use an enum. Now, the reason I use an enum is because right out of the box, it's shown that it is not meant to be instantiated. So with a struct, you can actually, if I just said static let base URL equals, whatever this is in here. Now, and this was a struct, I could actually still instantiate the struct by saying network routes like this, right? Now, technically it's very useless to do that. So we set this as an enum to tell future developers that this is intended not to be instantiated. So just a slight way of doing things. Now, it's not wrong to do the other way, to use a struct either. It's just a little bit more clear, at least to me, to use an enum in this case. But in any case, we are going to have a base URL that's static. This is going to be private because we're not going to actually access this base URL from outside of this enum. So we're going to say http://127.0.0.1 at port 8000. So one thing we have to do is we're going to say URL. We want to create a URL object from each of these paths. And each path we're going to have is going to be dictated by a case. We're going to have one for registering a user. We're going to have one for access token. This is going to be the login endpoint. Case login data. I call it login data, but basically this could probably be recalled to fetch secure data is probably a better name for it. So then what we need to do is, based on what route we're using, we have to return a URL so our network layer can actually use it to fetch from that specific URL. So we're going to save our path string. We're going to say switch self case register. And we're going to say path equals network routes. Can't spell again. Routes dot base URL plus API / register case token. Much of the same stuff here. Okay. Cool. Okay, so the other thing we have to do is, so this sets up the URL that's going to be used. The other thing that we have to do is we have to state which type of HTTP method do each of these URLs require. Which one do they use? And we do that by just having another computed property here called method. And much of the same way, we're going to say switch self. Actually, I think Xcode can autocomplete this if I go down here. There we go. And we're going to say return.post, but it's going to be register and the access token. So we can combine the switch statements by just using a comma and separating them this way. If this gets very large, what I might do is I actually would probably still separate this out and then probably organize these alphabetically. It's more easily readable that way rather than having a gigantic line all the way to the right on different cases. This works very well with a couple cases, but when these grow, it's probably more feasible to keep each case on their own line. Okay, so the fetch secure data one, we're going to say return.get. If you really want to be slick about this, you can allow the compiler to handle the return statement for us. We can do this. It's a little bit cleaner, some would say. So, okay, so now that we have defined this, we are ready to start our first view model. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with the registration view model. Say new file, RegisterViewModel. Spelled that right? Okay, so There's a couple different ways you can do this. I think most people would probably say something like class register view model. I actually came back from doing that. I don't do that anymore. What I do is I actually use namespacing, and I say extension register view controller, and then I put the class within the extension, and I call it view model. Now, there's a reason I do this. One being I don't ever have to worry about naming this thing, which, you know, it's really not a big deal. I would just name it register view model. But it's nice because you know exactly what this is going to be named, because it's going to be RegisterViewController.ViewModel. A little bit cleaner. You don't have to worry about name clashing issues, although it's more of a preference, honestly, unless you get on like a big project. But I've come down to using this because there are some syntactic niceties of doing it this way, but there's really no reason why you should use one way or another, other than kind of like a you get name spacing out of the box, which can be very useful. You get a couple things of syntactic sugar, like I mentioned. Other than that, it's more preference. So in any case, what we're going to be doing is we're going to have one extension on this, and this is going to be our actions. And we're going to say extension RegisterViewController.ViewModel. This is how you create an extension on that class. And we need a couple things in the view model. Because this is a registration screen, we still have the email, password, and confirm password. So we're going to say var email string Now the view controller is going to use these view model properties to actually set the text. And then we're going to be handling everything from the view model. So the next thing we need is we actually need to have access to our network layer. And we need the initializer. We don't actually need this though. So we can get rid of that. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to create the code that actually accesses the backend. So we should have only one method in here, and we're going to call it submit register. And we're going to use Swift's really nice async and await functionality on this. Like I mentioned in the network handler, all of these, let me minimize this so you can see a little bit here. All of these use Swift's async await methods. It works really nicely when it comes to multiple threads. I went a little bit in depth in this in the previous video. I'll leave it all in that video. Go back and check it out if you need to. So we're going to say guard let email let password let confirm password else. Again, this is just Swift compiler magic going on here, just saying we found a local property named email, and we're going to try to unwrap it right here, and if it's nil, we're going to say that this guard statement's going to fail. We're going to throw a form error dot missing fields. I'm going to do one more check, and this is going to be our form validation. Say not email dot is empty. Not password is empty. So if the email is empty or the password is empty, it's going to fall into the guard statement. We're going to say the password has to equal the confirm password. Else what we're going to do is we're just going to print ourselves a message. And then we're going to say we're going to throw a form error incorrect entries. Now, what you would normally do right here, you would probably bubble this up to the view controller in some way, shape, or form. There's two ways to do that. You can either use Combine, and we'll see Combine in the HomeViewController here shortly. But you'd either use Combine to bubble it up into a message, and then from the view controller, you would observe that message. And if there was an error message that was not nil, you'd show it an alert. Or you'd have a completion handler in here to handle that. Or how this is set up is you would consume the error from the view controller, and then you would show an error. We're actually going to do that. I'll show you how that works here in a minute. But the other thing you would do here is you log this to a bug tracker like Sentry or Crashlytics or something. So this is where that NetworkRoutes comes in. It's going to come out really nicely. We're going to say let route equals NetworkRoutes.register. Now what we can do is we can say let method equal route.method. We're going to guard here, say let URL equals route.url. Else we're going to throw configuration error.nil object here, and just for the sake of our sanity, we are going to move down, say print no URL found. So that's basically all the configuration we need for our route here. Now what we can do is we can say let JSON dictionary equals email password password 2. This is how the backend's set up. Now you might be wondering to yourself, why am I using a raw dictionary here versus creating a codable class that I can just translate into JSON? It's up to you. Because this is a one-off and I'm never going to use this specific schema ever again in any way, shape, or form on this project, I'm going to keep this as a raw dictionary. I'm not going to go through the boilerplate, the time to create the boilerplate to actually create a codable class or struct to then put this into a registration endpoint. It's just way easier just to do it this way. You can. What will end up happening is if you have a ton of one-offs and you create a codable structure to encapsulate this, you're just going to have a bigger hierarchy here. It may or may not be scalable depending on how big the app is, but pros and cons to these things. If it's a big app, you're going to architect it a different way. If it's a small app, doing it this way is probably more feasible. This is probably actually more feasible on larger apps that don't reuse the schema everywhere either. But each use case is different. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say equals try08 network handler dot request. Say URL JSON dictionary. And we're going to say HTTP method is our method.raw value, because remember this is an enum. So it's returning the method, and the method that it returns is an actual HTTP method enum. So we're saying raw value to get the actual raw value of it. I go into the set this thing here. It goes inside the network handler. We're done. That's it. It might be a little anticlimactic because of how, all of the boilerplate we went through in earlier videos has really paid off. And this is our entire request. Let me minimize this a little bit here so you can see a little bit easier. But this is the entire thing. That's it. So the majority of this is just form validation, to be honest. We have a bunch of lines for form validation. We set up the route, have a JSON dictionary, and then we just send the request. That's it. Now, because this is a registration endpoint, we're not returning anything. We're just waiting for the user to get an email. What I would do in a production app is when this succeeds, I would just tell the user, hey, we're going to show an alert that it succeeded. We're actually going to do that here in a second too. But this is it. All that boilerplate, once that boilerplate's done, it makes our endpoints very easy to manage. So let me get back here into the normal size. So now what we have to do is we have to go into the ViewController and set up the ViewModel stuff. So the first thing we have to do is we actually have to have a field on the ViewModel called, well, ViewModel. So we're going to say private let ViewModel model. And we have to have an initializer in order to pass this value in. Required. Say ViewModel. Please note that you can't do this using a storyboard, what I'm doing right here. Because storyboards, you can't really override the initializers on them because they have that specific codable or NS coder initializer. You can't pass in a ViewModel. What you can do in that case is you would make this into a optional variable and then just assign it after you instantiated it from within code. Or you would, if you use segues, you would have to use that prepare for segue method. It just gets kind of cluttered. Because this is all programmatic UIKit, we can actually just create an initializer and handle it much more easily. Say self.viewModel equals viewModel. Super.init. Say nil because we are not initializing this from a storyboard at all. And then we have to override the init coder. We're going to say precondition failure. What we're doing here is we're just saying, we're telling the developer really, hey, we're crashing the app for this reason. We're not overriding the init coder. So if someone's trying to use this in a storyboard, they can't do that. It'll just crash the app. And precondition failure has some niceties. I'll let everyone else take a look at it. But this is basically saying, like, we realize that we're purposely failing the app here because a precondition that we're not including in here. So we're automatically crashing the app for a known reason. Okay, so now that that's done, what we're going to do is we're going to come down to our actions here. And this onRegister tap, which we are not handling right now, we're just basically navigating for the sake of a sample in the previous video. We're going to replace that with ViewModel. We have to assign all the values in our ViewModel, the values that are currently in the view. So we say email text field dot text. So we're saying here's the text field text, and we're just assigning it to the ViewModels fields. In SwiftUI, you would just use published properties, and this would happen automatically. A little bit more boilerplate in UIKit for this. You can set up extensions. If you use a third-party package called RxSwift, they do have bindings for each of these, and I think they have a publisher on these. They do. So you could set up observers whenever this text change and then automatically update the ViewModel. But that's outside of the scope of this video right now. So we're just going to do this manually for right now so it's a little bit easier to understand for some people. Password text field dot text. And we're going to say task, and this is what spawns off a separate thread. This is where we go from the main thread up here to a separate thread down here, and how we can start using our nice async await functionality. We're going to say do. We're going to say patch down here because this is a little bit quicker to do. We're going to say await main actor dot run. And this is how we get back on the main thread. Now, if you've used different multi-threading functionality in the past, you might be familiar with dispatch queue.main.async to get back on the main thread. This is still valid. You can still use this right here. But because we're using async await, we have the easier functionality. I don't know if it's necessarily easier, but we have this await functionality for main actor.run. I tend to do it this way. Because it gets your mind into the whole async await functionality a little bit more easily. And it gets you under the habit of using async await rather than relying on dispatch queue.main.async everywhere. We're going to say run just in case somewhere unique self in. Make sure that the screen still exists and we're not capturing self. We're going to say self show OK alert. We're going to say there's an error message. It's just going to be error localized description. This is what's going to show the user that little error message on screen again. It's going to pop up with a native alert and tell them, hey, something happened. So now we're going to implement the functionality. Register. That's it. This is the whole call. So when it succeeds, it's going to fall into this next line. If it fails, it's going to fall into the catch. So now at this line of code, it's guaranteed that it has passed because we're not throwing an error. So we're going to say await main actor dot run. I'm going to say weak self again. Say show OK alert. That is going to be registered. We say message. Nice thing about this is we can just say ViewModel.email. And then we're going to have a completion here. So after the user taps, we're going to say okay. So after the user taps OK, what we're going to do is we're going to say self.navDelegate.onRegistered registration complete. Two reasons for this. One, the user has actually tapped the OK button to do this. And two, this completion happens after the alert fully disappears from the screen. There is about a 0.3 seconds of time when that animation happens. And you don't want to do navigation while it's still on screen. So this little closure here handles that for us. And that's it. The other thing that we want to add to on here is when the user is entering information, the form that shows up, the keyboard has a return key on it. Right now, we're not doing any kind of screen manipulation to move the fields up above the keyboard. So we really want to handle focused field navigation on here. And I'm getting an error here. Closure and type word expect, but one is body. There we go. This string interpolation, this is just saying that this isn't optional. We can technically force unwrap this right here because we are assigning it up here. And that'll get rid of the error. But if you didn't want that, you could unwrap it up here in a different way. I tend to not use this kind of stuff right here, just because forcing unwrapping it could cause crashes. But in this context, it's fairly safe because we know that we have text up here. And we know that text exists because we've already validated it in the ViewModel. So technically speaking, it's okay right here. It's never going to crash. But be careful when using forced unwrapping optional values. Okay, so we're all set with this function. Now, the last thing I want to do, like I said, is we need to handle the focused state when it comes to these fields. So when the user taps the return button on the keyboard, we want to move from the email field down to the password field, then down to the confirm password field. And we do that by adhering to the UI text field delegate protocol, or sorry, the delegate. We say extension ViewController UI text field delegate. And just to be consistent here, we're going to say func text field should return. So when the user hits the return key, this function is going to be called each time. And what we're going to do now is we're going to say if text field is our email text field, we're going to say password text field dot become first responder. So we're going to say if the user taps the return key when the focus is on the email text field, we're moving the focus to the password text field. And that's what this become first responder does. They're going to say else if text field is our password text field. Then we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to move it to the confirm password text field. That become first responder. And then if we're on the confirm text field or anything else happens, what we're going to do is we're going to say view.end editing. We're going to force that to true. And this will hide the keyboard. So when the user is done, we can hide the keyboard. We could also automatically submit the request when they hit return on this. Now what we would do is we would go up into the view configuration and we would change the return button to a done button. But I'm not going to go over that right now outside of the scope of this video. And we're going to return false here because we don't want this having the default functionality on it. So, and there we go. Then we have to actually go up here and we have to say the delegates. So I've written it in here already. We say delegate is self, and everything is good. One thing to mention, because we added that ViewModel property up here in class, we have to actually pass it into our previews. And because these are previews, I'm just gonna kind of use kind of nasty syntax here, and I'm just going to initialize the ViewModel this way. We could also do probably makes much more sense. And this will get rid of the error, or we could have just removed the previews. But a note about previews, when this happens, I usually have a different schema for sample data, and I use that sample data for the previews. You don't want to set up like third-party packages, some database calls, or anything that requires like internet access in the previews. So usually you want to make sure that when you are showing previews, you're using sample data. And we're going to be going over like build configurations and all that stuff and how to set up a production ready project as far as like enterprise level individuals or projects are set up in a future video. So I'll go over how to actually handle these situations in a future video, a future class. Okay, so the RegisterViewController is done. Last thing we have to do for this one is we have to go into where's our coordinators here? I'm going to minimize this, AppNavCoordinator, and we have to give our view controller the view model. So we have to say let view model equals RegisterViewController.viewModel NetworkRoutes.init. Now, I would have a whole config. I would have like dependency injection a little bit on another level up from this point in a production level app. In this case, because the network handler is so simple, I'm just initializing it for each one of these. Usually I would pass it into the AppNavCoordinator, but for the sake of this video, we're going to keep it a little bit more lightweight. Okay, so moving on to the next one, let's do the LoginViewController next. So for this, we are going to say file, ViewController, oops. Now, dawns on me that if you really want encapsulation, as far as namespacing goes with these view models, what you would probably do is you would probably say LoginViewController extensions down here or something. Up to you how you want to set it up. Okay. So this is the login. So we're going to have a email and we're going to have a password. We're also going to have a network And this is where our token storage comes in with Keychain. Hitting buttons. Okay, so the same thing like last time. We're gonna have a extension, and these are gonna just be the actions, the submit action. Up, and we're gonna say guard let email, in much the same way we did in the last view model. We're just validating the form now. It's probably cleaner if we just leave this on one line. Okay, so again, this is just the same stuff over and over again. The nice thing about the boilerplate is we know it's very, very consistent on how we set these things up. So we don't have to think about it as much. Saves us time, it makes us more efficient. See here, network handler dot west, say URL, JSON dictionary, JSON dictionary, response type, and this is response type. Oops. All right, did I set this up a little differently here? Look into the response type. Yeah, it's all there. All right. Okay. Last thing we need to do is save the token. That's it. That's the entire method right there. I'm gonna minimize the text a little bit just so you can see it a little bit easier. So we validate the form again. We set up the route and the method. We set up the dictionary, make the request, and we save the token. That's it. That's all you need. And again, because we're using the async await stuff here, we can just throw, instead of having a closure here, we can just throw stuff up to the caller and it can handle it as needed. That's it. The backend is set up as username. We're using emails as usernames here, so this is why that dictionary is set up. And let's move on. So go back in the LoginViewController. Same thing, same setup as last time. We're just going to add the ViewModel here. I'm actually going to copy and paste from our RegisterViewController because it's going to be the exact same thing here. So this little ViewModel and the initializers, we're going to just plop right in here. I don't need the model controller. I'm going to plop right here. There we go. Okay, minimize some of this stuff. And in the actions on the onSubmit tapped, we're going to handle it much like how we handled it in the registration view controller. We're going to say ViewModel.email equals email text field dot text. Password is password text field dot text. And then the task again. So we're spitting off a separate thread here, but we're allowing the system to handle it for us rather than us manually doing dispatch queue.async. Wait. Actually, we can go right into the view controller, right down to the actions. Just copy the error handling right in there. You say try await ViewModel dot submit login. Also, real quick, the reason I could copy and paste it directly is because of that name spacing right there. So I could just copy it and paste it right in here. I don't have to worry about renaming this ViewModel or refactoring it because they're all just called ViewModel. Here's where the nicety of doing it that way comes in. Or you could create a base class called ViewController and just make this into a generic and just never worry about it. Okay, so that's passed. So we say await main actor dot run self in. We don't want to capture self. Nav delegate login successful. Okay, now same thing as last time. So we're done here. So this is the entire request after we submit that. Same thing down here is we want to add the field focus delegate, so the text delegate down here. Before I do that, I'm going to solve this error real quick. So it stops complaining at me. UI text field delegate. Same thing, we're going to say func text field return. I'm going to say if text because we only have two fields, after if we hit the return key on the password text field, then we can just say view.end editing true and false. And back up here, we're going to say delegate is self for our text fields self. We're done. So now we're going to go back up into the coordinator here and set the view model on that one. And we're going to say view model. Okay, so one last one to do here. So we're going to say HomeViewModel. I've had to do a lot of refactoring like this lately on a client project. It's always fun. Extension controller model. This one's going to be a little bit different, only because we're going to use Combine on this. I'm going to give you a small glimpse of how published properties work when it comes to consuming them in UIKit. A little bit of reactive flow here. Now remember, on this one, what we did in the HomeViewController is we were manually setting on the reset the text tab. We were manually resetting that here. We are going to do that on the ViewModel now. And to do that, we have to actually create a constant that holds that default text when we switch it back. So we're going to say let default info text equals, copy and paste it, easier to do. we're going to say at published var info text. And we're going to say it's going to be equal. We're going to make this static real quick here. So then we can say HomeViewController.default ViewModel info text, just so we can set it as the default here. Cool. So private handler to make the requests. We need the token storage again because we need access to that access token that we just saved within the LoginViewController to make this request. Storage in it. Need this here. All right. So what's going to happen is the ViewController is going to observe this, and then we're going to change it from within the endpoint that we actually fetch it. So we're not actually passing the value we get from the backend to the ViewController and having the ViewController set it directly. We're bubbling it up through this published variable into the ViewController. Okay, now same thing like last time. We're going to say func fetch secure data. It's going to be sync rows again. Say this time it's going to be really short. We're going to say let route equals network routes dot fetch secure data method equals method route URL found throw configuration error dot nil object. We also need to get the access token. So we're going to say let access token equals token storage dot get. Now keep it in line, guys. All right. And then we're going to pass this into the actual request. So now we're going to say let response data equals try await network handler dot request. This is going to have a response type. Oh, hitting the wrong buttons here. Okay, so request dictionary. We're not gonna need this. Just trying to show you everything here. So content type. We defaulted this to JSON, which is exactly what we're going to be using. So we're not going to need that. And we're going to say URL. Response type is our secure fetch data right here. Secure fetch data. Secure fetch data.self. We're going to say method.raw value again, and then access token. So then if this passes, we have our response data. So now we can just say info text equals response data dot message. So this is going to return this secure fetch data. I don't know why this, see, cannot convert type access token to type string. Access token dot access token. That's right. It's probably going to be easier if we do it this way. Make more sense. So basically, what just happened was we're actually fetching an access token object, and I just had to use the actual string, which is this is the actual string, because this doesn't take in an access token object, it takes in that actual access token string. So that's probably why I wasn't getting autocomplete on this. Response data dot message. There we go. Yep. So that's it. So now same thing as last time. Go back into the ViewController, and I'm going to go into the login one, copy the ViewModel code, go back into my home controller here, paste it in. Okay. Close some of this stuff out, and now we have on fetch tap. So for this one, there's going to be two different things here. One thing we want to do, let's see, is we're just going to say task, and we're going to do catch, just like last time. I'm going to go back in. We're going to handle this exact same way that we handled all the other ones. I'm going to come down here into the actions, back in the previous code we did. We're just going to paste that in. And we're going to say try await ViewModel.fetch secure data. We don't have to actually show any modals here, because if this is successful, then the text is going to change on screen. There's a visual indication that something happened. Then when we hit the reset button to reset the text to come back to a clean slate, what we're going to do is we're actually going to move into the HomeViewModel and handle it there. Func reset info text, just to be a little bit more consistent here. And we are going to say the info text is equal to this string again, basically the default text. Then from here we can say ViewModel reset info text. And then, like everything else, we need to fix the error in the previews here. Cool. Let's see. The last thing we have to do here is, right now, if we ran this, nothing would change on screen, because the view controller is not actually observing this yet. So we have to add that. So what I like to do is I like to squeeze this in between the view setup and the actions. I say mark observers private extension controller. I'm going to say setup observers. And from within here, before we get started on that though, we have to do two things. First off, we have to import Combine. So if this isn't already in there, add that in there. The second thing we have to do is we actually have to add one else. We have to add private cancelable. Now, if you're not too familiar with Combine and reactive programming in Swift, I highly recommend downloading a book on this. I'll be going over this a little bit in the future, but just know that whenever you observe something, that observation, if you will, has to be stored somewhere. So in Combine, those are stored as cancelables. When a cancelable gets deallocated from memory, that observation basically it gets deleted. It gets cleared out, that it no longer happens. So these are nice. These cancelables are nice because if you store them in a set and say you want to refresh them, you can just reassign this a new empty set of cancelables, and all of the old observers will just disappear. So in some context, you may need this, like if you observe a database value and then other observers are dependent on that observer, you would basically refresh those sub-observer cancelables, and that's how you would kind of refresh those observers. Kind of more of an advanced topic outside of the scope of this, but just know that when we observe something using Combine, we have to store them as cancelables. So to observe it, we say ViewModel $info text. The $sign accesses the publisher. If we just said info text, notice how the signature is now string. But if we prefix that with a $sign and say info text, we now get the publisher. So text, and we want to say .receive. That's not the right one. Receive on dispatch queue.main. we're saying that anytime this is updated, we want to receive the update on the main thread because we're going to be updating the views. We can't actually update the views on any other thread, or else the system will complain and weird things will happen. We want to sync. This is going to be week self new text. We're going to say self dot info text dot text equals the new text. And like I said before, we have to store the observer, the object that represents the observer, in the cancellables. That's how you do it. Oh, down here. Now we have to call this, so we just have to go back to the lifecycle methods up here and say set up observers. I usually like to set up the observers after I set up the views, just so sometimes these methods will get called first and foremost. So if that happens, you want the views to exist before it's trying to edit the views. So that's what's happening. So we're done on this. That's it. So now we have to go into the AppNavCoordinator, and again, HomeViewController, ViewModel, and we're going to say .init model. That's the entire app. So let's just build this to make sure we didn't do anything wonky here. Build succeeded. Okay, that's the iPhone 15. UIKit, let's play this. Okay, so the project built, fine. And here we are. So the first thing we're going to try is we're going to try the registration endpoint. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in the backend project here so we can show you how this works. So two things to note. So it's running. So this is running on localhost right now. We're going to show the database, and we're going to show the users, the user records. So right now we have the default basic or the webmaster that you can use to access the admin site. This is not the user we're going to use to log in. We're going to register for a new one. So what you're going to notice is when I send requests out, you're going to see it from within the terminal down here. So you're going to see this get hit. So if I go back into my simulator here, go to register, and I say, click on this. It's going to take a second for the keyboard to show up here. Say, let's just say John at example.com. And then just to show you the functionality we had here, if I show the keyboard one more time and I hit return, it's going to switch focus to the next field. If I hit return again, wait a second, it's going to go to the confirm password. If I hit it one more time, it's going to dismiss the keyboard. That's the UI text field delegate that we use down there. This, I'm just going to say tester123. Tester123. I'm going to tap register. When I hit this, you should see text right here. Tapped on it. Boom. So the backend received it. It was a post request to the endpoint API register, and it was a 201 object created. And we can see it was registered, and activation email was sent to John at example.com. Obviously, this is a fake email, so it's not going to actually send. We're going to skip that step here. And after we were successful, we automatically navigated back to the login screen. Now, if I refresh this database right here, and I hit this, you're going to see a new user. Boom. John at example.com right there. So we are all registered. I'm going to cheat a little bit here, and I'm going to activate it this way. I'm going to submit it in the database. I just don't want to go through that whole process right now. I'm going to save some time. So if we go back into the app, so we just force activated the user. We're on the login screen. We're going to say John at example.com. I'm going to type in the password again. Tester123. If you're wondering, I'm using my keyboard to do this. I hit tab to get to the next field. And if I hit submit, you're going to see that the token endpoint should get hit. There's no error. And it did, so it returned the actual access token. and we are now on the home screen. Now, if I hit fetch secure data, now we have an error. Cool. This is actually nice because we can debug this. So operation couldn't be completed. Let's go back into Xcode and see why. So we've got all this metadata stuff. Xcode 15 just prints out all of this jargon. It's just not useful half the time. Let's hit it one more time. All right, we're not getting an error here. That operation couldn't be completed. An error. Are we getting anything on the back end? 404 not found. So, okay, so login data is not found. Let's take a look at our URLs in the app first. Routes, API, auth, login, data. Okay, so that looks fine. It's a get method, which is correct. Let's go into our project here. Okay, so the issue here, it was an easy mistake. So we don't have auth prefixed on the login data. So if I go back into Xcode, this right here doesn't exist. So we can hit that, delete that. And if we rerun the project, that replace. Back in the simulator. Back in here, say John at example.com. Tester 123. So we log in again. Fetch secure data. We'll hit this button. I'll go back into my backend project to see. So we can see that it gets hit. Hit fetch secure data. Boom, we are logged in. So we got the login data right here. Now, if you didn't follow the backend projects videos at all, what we're doing in that area is we're literally just responding with a message of you are logged in. So if I go back into the simulator, we have the you are logged in. We're done. So the last thing we do is we log out, and that's the whole app. So this whole video has just wrapped up all the little tiny loose ends right here. There is one more thing that we have to do to make this fully complete in a production level app, and that is we have to make sure that whenever we start the app up, an AppNavCoordinator, that if this is the first launch of the app, we want to make sure that we clear out any previous access tokens from Keychain. Keychain persists between installs because it's saved in the user's, essentially their cloud. So when the user uninstalls the app and reinstalls it, if the access token still exists, technically speaking, that is a logged in state. So what we want to do is, just for the sake of it, I'm just going to add it all into the AppNavCoordinator right here. Is we're going to say let launch key equals com dot coding dot auth app, and we're going to say if we're going to say user defaults dot standard if user defaults dot bool for key launch key. If it's false, I should rename this. Instead of launch key, let's use, naming is one of the hardest things. We're going to say did complete first launch. So what we're doing is we want to say that if the app has ever been launched at all, ever, then we are not going to go through this process. If the app has never been launched, then we're going to say, all right, make sure that any access token that we have stored is cleared out for this app. So if we did not launch first, then we're going to say access token storage dot delete. And then we're going to say user defaults dot set value true or key did complete first launch. And then technically speaking, in this start method right here, what we would want to do is we would want to say user, so we want to say, actually, let's do this. Say if dot get is not equal nil, then we want to show home screen. Else and that is how you would handle this in production. So basically what we're saying here is we're getting the user defaults, so we're storing this in user defaults. User defaults clears out between installs. So if you uninstall the app, user defaults are stored within the app sandbox. Underneath, I believe it's the preferences directory. When you delete the app, all these user preferences are deleted. So if the user reinstalls it, this Boolean will just default to false. So if it is false and we've never launched it before, then we're going to say delete the token storage if it exists in Keychain. This will just error out and just not get handled if it doesn't exist. And then we're just saying, hey, we did complete the first launch, so never handle this ever again unless the user uninstalls the app and reinstalls it. Now, if the user does have a access token stored in Keychain, we are logged in. So then go to the home screen. If they don't have one, then they should be logged out. Now, if we rerun the app, and we're going to replace it. Yep. So if we rerun the app, we should automatically have, we logged out before. So now we have to log back in, john@example.com. And we're going to say 2, 3, submit. Now, if we close the app and go back in, we should hit the home screen. We're on the home screen right now. If we log out, go back in, should be on the login screen. Now let's log in. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go home and we're going to uninstall the app, delete the app. So it's now in Keychain, right? So we're going to come in here. I'm going to hit a breakpoint to show you what happens. So we're going to run the app again. And because we have that token in Keychain, what you're going to see here is if I delete this and I say print out token storage dot get, and it's going to take a second. You see how it still exists, right? The token is still there. So this is why we need to do what we do here. So now that it's a first install, it's going to hit this, and this is going to be false. So it's going to go into this area to delete the token, and then it's going to set to true, and then it goes down, and we have no token anymore. So it's going to say nil, and it's going to go to the login screen right here. And that's how you handle it. But there you go. That's the entire project. So we're done. In the next videos, we're going to be doing the same thing, except we're going to be using SwiftUI. And we're going to be using pure SwiftUI navigation. And then I think what I'll be doing to finish off the entire iOS auth series is to show you the architecture that I use, which are SwiftUI views wrapped in UIKit. That architecture is going to be exactly the same as what you see here. The only difference is instead of having just one controller, we're going to have another object called view, and those views are SwiftUI views, and they're going to be wrapped in hosted controllers. But this coordinator will act exactly the same. So that's it. We're done. So let me know in the comments if you are confused about something, if you want me to explain something a little bit more clearly. And yeah, I think that after this video, everyone should be good to go when it comes to creating their own login system. So Yeah, we'll see you in the next one. We'll be going over SwiftUI, like I said before, and happy coding.